Raising the Bets is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to Raising the Bets, a family podcast of pirates and penguins. We're a Catholic family raising 5 kids outside of Boston, sharing the joys and challenges of marriage, homeschool, our adventures near and far, this week very far, making sense of the world and experiencing the best parts of our culture. I'm Dom Bettinelli.
And I'm Melanie Bettinelli.
So before we get started, Melanie, I want to follow up on last episode, which was the labeled as hate speech by Facebook episode.
Right.
So just to kind of catch up, you probably have heard it already, but to catch up, a friend of mine posted this quote from St. Augustine. It's very anodyne, very straightforward, plank in your eye, beam in the other guy's eye, quote, or the other way around, on Facebook. And he had it banned. Like, Facebook took it down as hate speech. I'm like, that can't be right. So I did it. And sure enough, Facebook took it down as hate speech. And I blogged about it, a podcast about it, and then posted on Facebook and Twitter, and it got some notice. And
yeah, a little bit of notice. Yeah,
it showed up in like German, the press, the British Catholic newspaper, various online conservative media, Daily Wire, PJ Media, The Blaze, CBN, Todd Starnes, LifeSite, too, and eventually Facebook reversed itself. They doubled down once, like taking down my second time, saying, why would Facebook call this hate speech? They took that down. And then when I asked for human review, they rejected the appeal. And then there we sat until it got notice.
And then it snowballed.
And then it snowballed into this whole thing, and it got all over the place. And through some experimentation, some people posted it, they had theirs taken down as hate speech. Other people posted it, never had anything happen. So there's all this question. And the big thing was, and I'll talk more about this on Secrets of Technology, the other podcast I do, about the technology aspects of this. But we figured out that probably the phrase in it that said, men are hopeless creatures, which from Augustine's point of view, he means human beings are without hope. They're sinful. Human beings are sinful, and which is not all that controversial of a statement, I guess. Shouldn't be. But I think Facebook's algorithm and then its first human reviewer took that to mean as an anti-male hate speech,
which would be very strange for a man to be posting.
Yeah, like, is it hate speech if someone says something about themselves? It's the whole hate speech thing it's a whole nother weird topic. But so eventually, because of all this media attention and Facebook's PR department getting inquiries from journalists and such, they reversed themselves. That's my guess. I email that said we made a mistake and we restored your post, and other people did too.
And they apologized. They said we're
sorry we screwed up. Yeah. But the bottom line is we still are left with this situation where we just don't know what's going to trigger Facebook, and not everyone can get international media attention when there's silence by the big social media company. So that's where we stand. I mean, it's been very interesting. The thing that gets me is this happens. I post about it, and then we go away for a week.
And we were pretty much...
I was cut off from... I was getting media requests, and, I was asked to go on the radio show to talk about it, and I'm sorry, I'm away. I can't... it's spotty internet access. So that happened. So that whole episode, I'm looking in the rearview mirror at that and saying, we're done with for now. One interesting aspect to this... Only 2 media outlets, the first 2, ever actually contacted me for comment. All the rest wrote their stories completely based on what the other guys wrote. No one bothered to send me an email to try to contact me, see if they get their information right. it's a very
no fact checking,
very different world. And the big problem is on my About Me page on my blog, I had forgotten to update it last year when I switched jobs and became full-time CEO of StarQuest, which I'm doing right now. And so the first reporter listed me as a pro-life activist, Catholic activist. I'm like, I don't think of myself as a pro-life activist. That's because I used to be director of community engagement for Massachusetts Citizens for Life. Now I'm pro-life. That's clear. But I'm like, why are you describing me as such? He said, well, that's what your bio says. And I looked. I'm like, oh my gosh, I forgot to update it. And so I'm sitting there updating it on my phone on bad internet access, updating my website. That was a chore. So then that just everybody has listed me as director of community engagement for Mass Citizens for Life, and not as my actual job, which is CEO of StarQuest, which was a little annoying.
Yeah, especially because it could have been, really good publicity for SQPN.
Yeah, but people came to my website, and the website links to this podcast and the others I do. So, hopefully some people followed there and found some good content, and hopefully you're listening now because you found the podcast that way. So that's put a pin in that. That one's done. We're moving on from that one. So the real thing is as I just said, was we went away. Melanie, where did we go?
Well, we went camping in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. For those of you who are not from around here, I guess. I actually wouldn't have known a couple years ago where Gettysburg was. So yeah,
I think I would have guessed more than a few years ago. Like, when I was younger, I would have guessed that Gettysburg was in like Virginia or
right in the South,
North Carolina, somewhere in the South.
Because we know it's a famous battle of the Civil War.
That's right, a famous battlefield from the Civil War. The battle was in 1863, but it was the northernmost major battle of the war, and it was. We can talk about it a little bit in a little bit, but it was the turning point of the war. Perhaps the bloodiest campaign. It sort of depends on how you define battle. Antietam was the bloodiest single day of the war, but Gettysburg took place over 3 days, July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 1863, and it was a huge human tragedy, huge human cost. But we'll get into that in a bit.
Right.
But why do we go?
Well, it's kind of a long story, but to cut it short, last fall...
As all our stories usually are.
Right. Last fall, we went to my family reunion in Kentucky in September.
Kentucky!
Right. My grandfather was born in Kentucky, and so this was a reunion of all of the descendants of his parents, my great-grandparents, of the Scott family. And so we decided...
to make it a trip.
Yeah, we made it a road trip. We stopped and visited friends in Pennsylvania and Ohio on our way down to Kentucky. And we went to the family reunion in Kentucky. My mom, my dad, my brothers, my sister were all there, some of my aunts and uncles, and a whole bunch of distant cousins, some of whom I know, some of whom I met for the first time. It was a great time.
It was awesome.
Yeah. And then we swung down to Tennessee because we were only a couple hours from Nashville, and we visited some friends in Nashville. Then we went camping in the Great Smoky Mountains in eastern Tennessee,
which was awesome.
Which was wonderful. We want to go back so badly. And then our plan was to spend 2 nights camping in Gettysburg, and we knew it wasn't going to be a very long trip, but it would be a peek at the battlefield.
It was historic, so
right.
Yeah.
So we were trying to do some historic educational things as well as friends and family.
And Gettysburg is about halfway between the Great Smokies and home.
Right. Unfortunately, while we were in the Great Smokies, Benedict, who had been nursing a cold since we left Massachusetts 2 weeks before, the changes in altitude...
They really messed with him.
They messed with him, and he ended up with an ear infection. And he was crying from pain.
On the trip. Well, it really manifested itself on the day that we were driving from Tennessee to Pennsylvania, which was a long travel day. That was the longest travel day, I think, of all.
It was a very long drive, and he spent the day mostly crying. He could only be mollified if we distracted him with an iPad, and I had to move to the back of the van and sit next to him for a long part of that day because he was just very distraught with the pain.
And so we had to cancel our camping last minute.
I could not see inflicting the boy who was crying all night long on other people in the campground. This would have been a very, very bad thing.
Yes. So we got a hotel in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, which was right next to Gettysburg. Stayed one night there and then just drove home from there to our house, which was fine. And we said, but we would come back. That was our big thing, is that we definitely would come back. And then we were looking at vacations for this summer. That was at the top of our list, is to go to Gettysburg. We usually go to Maine. We'll go camping in Acadia. We've stayed at a lake house on the Maine-New Hampshire border. So we've done things like that. We've stayed in New England generally. But that big trip to Kentucky really showed us that we could go on longer journeys and go further afield.
Now that the kids are older, it's not so daunting to do a little bit longer trip. And we figured out the camping thing, we thought, pretty well.
Yes. So that's what we did. We packed up early Monday morning, like 6:30 or so. We got in the car, we got in the van and headed out. And it was about, including stops, I think it was like 8 hours.
Yeah, something like that. We got there at
close to maybe 9 hours, didn't we? Yeah, because we had so you stop for lunch, and and then you got to stop a couple of times because people got to use the bathroom and that sort of thing. One in particular person who is the tiniest bladder in history, not one of the people on this podcast, and so we had to stop a couple of times, and so yeah, it wasn't a bad trip. I mean, it was 7, 8, 9 hours, which we managed to make the miles fly by listening to, I think we talked about this before, by listening to books on audio. We have Audible books, and we finished. So we've been listening to in the car the Arthur Ransom Swallows and Amazons books, and we finished the Peter Duck book, which is about a journey. I'm not going to get into the fictionalized journey. It's a story within the story of the children searching for buried treasure on an island in the Caribbean. It's not important. So we finished listening to that, and then we had about an hour of that left, and then we started listening to the next book in the series called Winter Holiday, which, given how hot the weather was last week, listening to a book that was all about snow and ice was very refreshing, I have to say.
Right.
So one of the things is the kids actually they asked at one point, why does Daddy do all the driving? Melanie, why does Daddy do all the driving?
Because he's afraid of me driving.
Because, well, that's not the only reason. But I just feel comfortable driving. I like to drive.
And I don't love driving long distances.
Yeah.
It's a sort of a pattern we settled into, actually, when we were still dating and on our honeymoon.
I had the car. Well, even when we were dating, I had the car. We're driving places that I knew. So,
right.
We just took my car. I had the better car when we were dating.
Right.
And
even when we were married, you still had the better car. And,
right.
I mean, it became our car, but I don't think I ever drove your car once.
You never drove the Intrepid?
I don't think I ever did.
Huh. It's interesting. Think about that. But regardless, so we sort of just fell in this pattern. But there comes a point where I'm on 5 hours sleep, didn't get enough coffee. It's a long, warm day. I'm tired. We have to switch. And so we switched for a while, which I tried to stay awake to listen to the book, but I like missed like a 3.
You missed a good chunk of the book.
No, I wouldn't say a good chunk of the book. I missed a couple of chapters.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like a 30 chapter book.
That's true.
I do need to go back and reread those parts, but so we make the time fly. The kids enjoy it. When the book is on, they're quiet and they're attentive,
and they don't fight.
When the book is off, they fight. Anthony makes noises, like repetitive noises, because that's what he does.
He kind of does that when the book is on too.
Well, yeah, he does do that. But
he's sitting right next to the cooler, and he flaps the handle up with his foot over and over and over again. He cannot
be still. He is a child full of energy all the time. Yeah. So the but the van is full of all of our gear. And one of these days, I think we're going to have to end up getting a utility trailer of some sort or some way to haul some of that gear. But for the moment, we put all of it in the van, and because there's like Lucy, we could put stuff by her feet because her feet doesn't touch the floor. So that works for now, but eventually that's not going to work. We'll have to figure something out then. But so the trip down itself was good. We didn't have, I don't think there were any problems, right?
No.
And the trip back was fine too. We didn't have really any troubles either way, which was very nice.
Just on the way back, we were all kind of tired and cranky,
as you always are at the end of vacation. And the reason we were all tired and cranky was because we picked the worst week ever to go camping in central Pennsylvania.
Heat wave, July. Don't go camping in July.
So here's today's lesson. If you're going to camp in July or August, camp in the mountains or by the sea. Like, we got fooled because we always would camp in Acadia in Maine, up in the coast. At night, you want to wear like a warm, like a light jacket. Not a warm jacket, but a light jacket.
And I've been camping, but like up in the mountains in Colorado, Montana.
Right. It was a 90s. It was in the 90s during the day, and at night, like when we were going to bed, it was still low 80s.
Right. It maybe got down to the 7, except for the first night when it got down to about 64. The rest of the nights, it only got down to like the mid 70s,
which was comfortable enough for sleeping, but not cool. Super. And it wasn't cool.
Like you did not want your sleeping bag on top of you.
Well, by the morning I did. By the morning, like sometime around in the middle of the night, I would pull my sleeping bag out from under me and sort of wrap it around me.
I only did that the first night.
Yeah, well, you sleep warm anyway, but so do I. But anyway, so it was hot. It was just hot all the time. It was hot in the car, hot out of the car. So that would be one downside. Hot, humid. And the thing that gets me is if we went this week, it's going to be in the high 70s, comfortable, dry. We just picked the wrong week.
Yeah, in the camp bathroom one day, I was talking to an older woman, and she was complaining about the heat. She'd just taken a shower to cool off, as I was about to do, and we got to talking about where we were from, and she said she was actually from Pennsylvania, the next county over, and she was complaining about how miserable it was.
Yeah. It was, yeah. The interesting aspect to this is, we camp in a tent outdoors. We all 7 of us in one tent, and we have a new tent this year. It's one I got as a review unit from Amazon, so we didn't have to pay for it. So that, take that.
Yay, free tents.
Free tent, take that for what you will. So it's a connectable tent. If you've ever seen, like, there was something going around on Facebook a few years ago of these experimental tents that you could, you connect with tunnels, and you get this whole village of tents that go together. Well, this is sort of on the same idea. There's a 6-person central octagon tent. Okay. Hexagon tent. I knew you'd correct that. And then you can connect up to 3 of these rectangular tents, slightly smaller 3-person tents. I love the numbers, by the way. 3-person, 6-person.
3 people of like Lucy's size.
Yeah,
maybe
3 tiny people could sleep in a 3-person tent. But you could. So what we have is the big dome, the big hexagon, and one of the connectable rectangles. That's what we got with it, and it worked pretty well. One of the things I really like about it is that when you zip open the windows, it is open. It is wide open, air in.
I've never had a tent that was as airy as this one is. Like, It's always hard when you camp in the summertime to get a nice cross breeze. This one, because all 6 sides had gigantic windows, you could get a cross breeze from any direction. So you were catching the wind, and it made it a lot more bearable.
Another positive is it went up pretty easy, given the size and that we're doing essentially 2 tents.
Yeah, it was very easy to put up. I was pleased with that.
Wigwam TP, wigwam TP. Come down, you're 2 tents. never mind. That's an old joke.
Uh-huh.
And so and you zip them together and you get this thing, and it was nice. And so what the idea was, in the little rectangular tent, I would set up my cot. I have a foldable camping cot, and it's pretty big because it needs to be big for me. And it does. If we didn't have an extra tent, I couldn't use it. Just it just doesn't fit everybody.
Basically, it would take up half of the big tent.
Yeah, in fact, it pretty much filled the small tent, the 3-person tent, and so that became my sleeping tent. We also put gear under the cot, and one night Anthony actually slept under there too.
Yeah, he did. He liked it. It was a little Anthony cave.
Yes, and the big tent was, because we also had an air mattress for you, and that Bella slept on with you. It was still pretty crowded, and we ended up using my camping hammock. I have a camping hammock that I just brought along because I thought the kids could sit in it during the day, but it's like a sleeping hammock too. But we ended up using that where the kids would sleep in that.
One kid took a turn. Sophie took a turn one night. Ben took a turn one night. Anthony took a turn one night.
Yeah, but Bella did not, and neither did Lucy.
No,
I don't think Lucy. That would have been. I mean, the thing is that it was set up literally right next to the big tent with the windows open. They're like 2 feet away from you. It's not like that far. So it's not like it was at all any type of problem that they would be too far away. So I like the tent. The downside of the tent, so we need to get another one of those 3-person connectable tents.
Right.
It's $130, which is not cheap, but it might be worthwhile. We'll talk about it. But it would be nice to have another space connected to it.
Yeah, because all 7 of us don't really fit in the 2 tents.
I mean, and if it had poured out, it would have been a problem.
Yeah.
Like if we'd had a soaking rain, which we'll talk about in a second. So we should get at least one of those. We could get 2 of them, and you have 3 of these side tents, and one could be an entranceway, or you could use it just for gear storage. I mean, you could,
or just have kids who aren't squabbling about being too close to each other.
Put 2 boys in one of them, put me in another, and put a child in the other, or you in the third one, or however that we want to do that. So that worked. So the tent was good. The downside of the tent is the zippers. I don't know what it is with Coleman and their zippers these days, but like the zipper on the carry bag, the zipper on the doors, they just were terrible. They were you couldn't zip it without catching fabric.
Yeah, they were very frustrating.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, so Coleman, you got to fix your zippers. So there was that part of the camping. What was I gonna say? Oh, the rain. So yeah, we had some rain. We had at least one night of late night rain. It was a drizzle. It was enough to get everything wet it didn't really soak everything.
It did cool everything off for that night.
It did. And, so we had a child in the hammock, and I had my rain fly. The hammock has a rain fly, and I had that over it. Hadn't staked it out. It just kind of hung over it. Quite honestly, I thought I'd have to stake it out. But it worked fine. It didn't get any water in there, so that was good. If it had rained harder, it might have been a problem. But
there wasn't a whole lot of wind or driving rain. It was
if it had been windy at all,
drizzle.
It wouldn't have worked. But so that worked out. The problem came. Well, we'll talk about the problem with that. So let's talk about the campground. So it's called Gettysburg Campground, and it's just west of the town of Gettysburg. And we'll talk about Gettysburg itself in a second. But the campground is just west of Gettysburg. And it's called Gettysburg Campground. A lot of RVs. It's mainly an RV place.
Right. There was only like a handful of tents until the Boy Scouts showed up.
Yeah. A whole Boy Scout troop showed up on our last 2 nights.
Yeah,
last 2 nights.
So I guess they showed up on like Wednesday, Thursday.
Yeah, and we were a little worried that they were going to be really noisy and disruptive, but turns out they weren't. They were respectful. They were good.
Actually, the noisiest were not the scouts themselves, but the parents or the leaders.
The leaders. Well, anybody who's been around scouts for any length of time knows that that's what happens. So the campground itself is mostly an RV place, big open space in these. It's trees,
lots of trees, which was nice.
Right, lots of trees with open space in between for the RVs, and then the tent area was sort of separate and clearly a new part of the campground.
And it was further back away from everything.
Yeah, it was in the way back next to a little stream, which a creek. Yeah, you could call it a creek.
It was called a creek.
Okay, it is a creek, and it was really nice. So it had a little bit of a waterfall, so you had that burbling noise at night to kind of cover any incidental noises,
which was nice.
That and the cicadas, which was actually keeping Sophie awake. Poor Sophie. The cicadas were pretty loud, but yeah. So and then there were all these birds. There was ducks, and then these herons. Did we determine that these were herons?
There was at least one great blue heron. There was a couple green herons that we saw, and I think probably an egret. Some really nice
egrets. We have a
birds.
Few. Yes. And of course the owl who came out around 10:30 every night, who really had a good hoot on him. That was the
owl was great.
That was quite the iconic owl sound.
And one night we actually had two owls, one on either side of the tent, hooting back and forth to each other for a while.
Don't forget the turkeys. There were turkeys in the woods.
Yep, turkeys with baby turkeys.
Yep. And something that screeched bloody murder at 3 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was.
The first night.
Something gave up the ghost. It was something else's dinner. It was pretty screechy. But so the campground was nice. They had chemical toilets in the tent area, which frankly, in necessity, as far as chemical toilets go, they were fine. They weren't really gross, but as far as
I didn't
porta potties go. But the main bathroom was a bit of a hike. Like it was like when you walked there, it was like half a mile.
Yeah, it was
there and back was a half a mile.
It was a nice little walk.
Yeah,
I didn't mind.
You got your steps in.
Yep.
Yeah, I got my steps in. So there was that, and it wasn't crowded at all. I mean, for one night, we were like there was like one other tent
right
near us. I mean, there was not many people.
I think that's the nice thing about camping from Monday on, because Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, really, there aren't very many people there. Yeah, most of the people have gone home, and
Thursday night is when people start coming in for the weekend.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and also it's middle of Pennsylvania and middle of July. Other people knew better, apparently.
Yeah, evidently not very many people were foolish enough to think that tent camping was a good idea.
Yes. So we did that, and it was nice. You get up in the morning, and when you're camping in a tent, you get up earlier, and you go to bed earlier.
Yes.
It's just you get up with the sun and the birds, and you go to bed as the sun went down. That's just the more natural aesthetic. It's the more natural rhythm of life. And so you get up early, and I would the first couple mornings, bacon and eggs, making bacon and eggs on my Coleman stove, the propane stove, and
you do most of the camp cooking.
Yeah, and that worked out. So the first night we got there, we went to the Lincoln Diner, which was recommended in Gettysburg, which was recommended by a friend who'd been before. And the kids got breakfast for dinner because hey, it's a diner, and it was good. It was serviceable.
I had gyros, and I was really pleased with them. They tasted just like the ones I remembered from Greece. So
yeah,
I'm happy.
I had meat lasagna, which was good. And I mean, the salad wasn't great. It was some iceberg lettuce and a quarter of a tomato and a ring of onion, and that was it. It was diner food. So and it was good. So we got up in the morning, and then we went to the park itself. And at first, the park is huge. The battlefield.
Basically, it's on almost all four sides of the town.
Right. It's pretty much surrounds the town.
Because the battle raged all around the town.
And it turns out that a lot of the roads were laid out, a lot of the roads that go through the battlefield were laid out to permanently mark various battle lines. So, and once you learn that, you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And now you understand where things are.
And then, of course, a lot of the battle lines were formed because of where the roads were.
Because there happened to be a road there that they could form up on.
Because they needed roads in order to move the
artillery and supplies and that sort of stuff. Right. So that's a little complementary. And so there was a little bit of driving around trying to figure out where things are. And then one of the things, again, I'm going to talk about this a little more in technical detail in the Secrets of Tech podcast this week, but there are a bunch of there's a driving tour that a self-guided driving tour,
an audio tour, like you buy the CD.
Well, I want to get to that in a second. The basic thing is that there's an auto tour or to the major sites of the battlefield, and there are different ways of accessing that auto tour. There are apparently, and I didn't realize this ahead of time, independent auto tours that you can buy. So there's all these apps you can download that purport to take you around on the tour. But there's an official one, which is one we were looking at, that it comes on CD, but it also comes with an app, and you buy it. It was $30, which is not cheap for an app or whatever, but it was $30, and you get the CDs, but you also get this code to download the app, and it downloads. For the life of me, I haven't been able to get it to do it now. Here, sitting at home on my really good Wi-Fi and my really good internet connection, it won't download the tour. I could not get the tour download to work. So the apps were a bust. All of them were. I mean, the other app that I downloaded didn't really work all that well. So we ended up going with the classic technology of the CDs, and it worked great. If you have a CD player in your car, do that. It makes more sense. It comes with a book.
The only problem we had actually was that we couldn't figure out on our CD player how to advance within a track. Like we could go from one track to another, but once you'd started playing the track, if you wanted to kind of rewind a little bit and hear something again, we couldn't figure out how to do that. We just had to go back to the beginning and hear from the beginning.
Yeah, that was a limitation of our car's CD player.
But it could have been a limitation of the users of the CD player.
Yes, but the
maybe
app,
if we'd found the manual.
Yeah, the app and guide come from a company called My Tour Guide, and they do it for a bunch of different. It's not just Gettysburg; they do it for a bunch of different places. But it comes with a book, and it has an audio tour. The Gettysburg one is an audio tour by this licensed audio guide. Tour guide for Gettysburg, and he's like known as one of the best. And so it says you started in the parking lot of the visitor center. It says listen to this. Okay, now pause and drive to the first location, stop number 1 on the auto tour. And I figured out after a bit that if you use Waze, the GPS app on your phone, and I'm gonna guess it might even work on like Google Maps, that if you enter Auto Tour 1 in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, those are all, somebody has put all those in. So that once we figured that out, like at first we were driving around going, I don't know where I'm going. Like, I remember that.
Yeah, we got so lost. We turned the wrong way, and you're trying to like listen to the thing, and the map wasn't all that great in terms of like which way you turn, right. Like the street signs. We were very confused. We got very turned around, and we went the wrong way.
And so I'm like, okay,
to the first stop,
and we couldn't get it to like pause and fast forward like we were just talking about. So we were like, oh, okay, just stop the CD. Let's get to the first place, hit play, and just get to the end of the first, whatever the first stop's information is.
Yeah.
But after that,
we figured it out.
We figured it out, and it was really good. Like it really did a really good job of like, okay, look to your left. This is what you were seeing here, and it also was as a narrative. It all hung together. It built on itself to really take you through the 3 days of battle.
Yeah, it started with day 1, and then went to day 2, and then day 3, and so you sort of drove through the park.
And you doubled back a little bit because the battle moved back and forth, but not too much.
But generally, you got by the end of the whole tour, we had a fairly good general sense of how the battle went and how it mapped onto the landscape.
And I felt like I had a pretty good sense of by the end of our days there, a really good sense of where everything was and how it all laid out.
Better sense because you were actually driving, and I
also have generally a better
internal map
anyway, sense of direction.
I didn't spend as much time looking at the maps as I could have.
Yeah.
But I did notice, like, I had checked out some books on Gettysburg and the Civil War before we left from the library, and I didn't bring them with us. But when I got home, I started paging through the Gettysburg maps, the book, and looking at the maps, and I was like, okay, I recognize this. Yes, I've been there, and yes, I see that, and I could visualize it in my head. So I do think I got a fairly good sense of how things work.
And the thing about it is having the story told, and it's not just the big story. There were also, he told the small stories as well. The stories of the individual soldiers and the human tragedies. And,
right. I'm sure there are hundreds more stories, but
thousands,
stories,
yeah.
Right. But the stories he told were very engaging, very personal. They made the people feel real and interesting, and
some of them are quite famous already. The story of the brothers on opposite sides, I think that's in Ken Burns's Civil War documentary. The brothers on opposite, who were, one was a rebel and one was a Union, and that whole thing. So there was that was on. So you've heard some of these, but they're good stories.
And there's a poignancy to you're listening to the audio tour, and he's like, right over there by that barn, that's where they met. And so you can suddenly see it in a different way, that even if you've seen the documentary, it's not the same as being there.
Right. Or even at the end of the tour, where you at the location of Pickett's charge, which was, they call the high water mark of the Civil War. It's the furthest, the closest the Confederates ever got to winning, really. If they had won this battle, if they'd won Gettysburg, and the way they would have won Gettysburg is if they'd won this charge. They could have won the war. They could have forced the Union to the negotiating table earlier, and they would have won a lot of what they were after. But they didn't. And so he talks about that. And this spot where that monument stands, I want to talk about the monuments in a second, is where the Pickett's charge died, where it faltered, where it stopped. And you're looking at it going, that's it. That's the spot. That is. I mean, this land, and one of the things I tried to do with the kids before we even got there was to emphasize to them that this battlefield is not a playground. It is a cemetery. It is soaked in the blood of men who fought and died for what they believed in.
Like Lincoln says in the Gettysburg Address, the brave men who struggled here have consecrated it far beyond our poor power to add or detract. And there is that sense of it's consecrated with the blood of the people who died there. There's something set apart about the places where they fought.
And the way the battlefield is set up, I mean, there are monuments all throughout, not just the park, but just along sides of roads and through the town. The monuments, this marks the spot of this regiment. This action took place here, and there were something like 600. Did they say like 600 artillery pieces in Gettysburg during the battle, and they have 400 of pieces at different locations on the battlefield where they were actually sitting during the battle.
That to me was one of the most, I don't know, moving. It made the place feel more real, because a lot of times you go to these historic places and your imagination kind of fails, but having the actual cannons there in the places where they would have been during at least some part of the battle, the kids would stand behind them and like imagine them shooting, and you could almost hear them. And of course, with the audio tour, they actually put in the cannon sounds, and so then when you got out of the car, you could almost feel that sense of like, this is where these guns stood, this is where the people fought and died, and that made it a lot more.
And there were hundreds, if not thousands, of these monuments. They look like grave markers. Like they look like it's like a giant cemetery, which it is in some case, some sense. It is, and yeah, every mark, every stone, every memorial marks a location where a unit stood, where men stood shoulder to shoulder, where artillery was fired from, where this general had his horse shot out from under him. I mean, these amazing spots that you could see it. This is where it happened.
The layout was really interesting, because they would frequently have a marker, like a little granite stone that would say, this marks the right flank of the
22nd Mass,
and this marks the left flank. And so you could see that between these two stones is where this particular regiment was lined up, and then right next to them would be, Illinois or Michigan or whatever. I can't remember the specific ones that were right next to each other. But you could kind of imagine then, like, this group of men was here, and then right here, this is the next group, and then right here is the next group. And it's very precise, very specific.
One of the things that Isabella pointed out to us when we got back was that we know the precise locations because of the work of this one guy who's basically, he was a 19th century, is like in the lifetime of the men who fought at the war, he was basically a nerd who loved maps and mapped everything precisely down to the meter, to the foot of where it was at the battle.
Right. He interviewed the soldiers, and he was responsible for the placement of the markers. And a lot of the monuments there, so you'll have not only the left and right flank, but then in the middle of them, you'll have a big monument to whichever regiment it is. But then it will tell the story. On this day of this year, this group did this, and it will lay out the very rough outline of the specifics of the battle.
One of the things that struck me was that the monuments were placed there within the lifetime of the men who fought there. So before 1900, most of them. Right. So a few were later, but we'll talk about that in a second. But they were monuments to all of the men who fought there. Today, we're seeing in various places monuments that commemorate both North and South soldiers who died being taken down because how dare we commemorate those awful people who fought for slavery. But the people who survived that war on both sides did not see that the same way. They didn't, the victors did not turn to the losers and say, you are awful, evil people who need to be suppressed.
Right. So often the monuments to the Confederate dead commend their bravery and their valor. And so even though they were on the opposite side, there was an acknowledgement that they were
still brothers.
They were admirable. And in fact, the most moving part, I think, of the park to me was the Peace Monument, which was dedicated in
1938
by Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Was it, or was it earlier? It might have been for the 1933. I was thinking, oh no, for the 1938 because the 125th.
Right. So President FDR went and they built this big
Eternal Flame Peace Monument.
Right. So it's a big tower, really, with a flame on top. And at the ceremony, the signage around it explains that at the ceremony were present
the last
surviving veterans of the Battle of Gettysburg, both Confederate and Union. And when they lowered the flag unveiling the monument, it was received by both a Confederate and a Union veteran working together receiving the flag. And that, to me, it was like, this is what peace meant to them. And peace meant that the men who had fought against each other on the battlefield were able to stand together and build this monument, dedicate this monument for peace.
Right. I mean, there's the Confederate thing. I mean, it's become an issue in our society right now. The idea that certain state capitals were flying Confederate flags still. There was that awful thing that happened in Charlottesville, Virginia last year, the year before last, where the protests and people actually died over Confederate monuments. And I don't know that this is the right way to go about opposing racism. I'm not sure that this is that this might be counterproductive, I think. I like the way the national park handled this. They handled there are Confederate flags marking Confederate things. They do not take them down because they are historical. This is a historical marker, an historical monument. I don't think you should watch, paint over this.
Right. I feel very strongly that it's important to see our history clearly, and these monuments help us to understand the past. And when we remove them, we lose something of our collective memory. And it struck me very much how this park preserves and transmits a certain memory. And that was really educational. It was moving. And I thought it was very important. And it was interesting to see how the kids...
They responded. I mean, Anthony more than once talked about, the human cost and how awful it was and how many people died.
Right. They really got a sense of like war is bad, war is evil, war is not glorious, and this was horrific. And I really thought that was something that impinged upon them.
Frankly, I think people who want to oppose racism and the evil things that they think that this war represents, and that it does represent in some ways, should go to these battlefields and see it up close and the way that they are presented, because you will come away from it even more motivated to avoid this sort of thing. We cannot, as a country, have another civil war. It would as horrible as the Civil War was, another one might even be worse. And the cost was so great. I mean, what was it? 50,000 casualties. Some I forget exactly what it was, but there was like 4,000 dead at Gettysburg. It was horrible. I mean, just the cost. So one of the things we had to kind of struggle with a little bit was, so we went to the visitor center, we went to the gift shop, kids could buy things. Lucy bought a nice blue Union soldier hat called a kepi, and she, that slanted hat that you see that they wear. So she bought one of those, and the boys wanted gray ones.
Although you have to contextualize. Ben said he wanted a gray cap, but he was a Union soldier who was
a
spy wearing a Confederate uniform so that he could spy on the Confederate army. So he had this narrative in his head that he was being a spy. But I think that they also like the idea of being able to have
on both sides.
I think they're looking forward to, if they have this hat, they can do reenactments themselves, and they like to have somebody on both sides. It's not very much fun to have only the Revolutionary War coats without having anybody in a red coat.
Right. Yes, exactly. So when they have their pretend battles, and then I bought a T-shirt that I didn't realize at first had both. They had Gettysburg on it and all this stuff. It has both the American flag and the Confederate flag on it. And I didn't even realize it until I was wearing it home and having stopped in a couple of rest areas. And I'm not sure whether I got looks askance or not. I might have. I
think that the Confederate flag, though, in the context of a T-shirt that also has the Union flag and the
Gettysburg.
name of Gettysburg, I think that reads differently to people.
For most, but not for everyone.
But I'm sure there would be some people who would find that even that a bridge too far.
But for us, I mean, I don't know. I don't think I would have bought the shirt if I'd seen it. Just out of sensitivity. I was looking for a Gettysburg shirt that didn't have it, and it came in stuffed inside a water bottle, and you get a water bottle and a shirt for one low price, and I didn't see the shirt.
But I did notice that throughout the town, like there was a blue and gray bar that had both Confederate and Union flags as part of their like branding, and there was a Pickett's buffet
right next to the location of Pickett's charge, which seems so tacky.
That seemed way over the top to me. Like Pickett died.
Well, I mean, literally,
literally a few hundred yards.
It's the
away.
Field, and the first thing off of the field of the battlefield, the very first thing off of the battlefield, is Pickett's buffet. I mean, it's so very American, and.
Yeah, you can't really imagine anybody but Americans.
Yeah, it was kind of tacky a little bit, but
I would like to jump ahead though and talk. Yeah. I don't want to
linger on this. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't want to not talk about our other excursion.
Oh, of course.
Which was to the shrine of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton.
Yes, which is only about 20 minutes away from Gettysburg, 8 miles on the road, close enough that some of the sisters actually, after the battle, traveled to Gettysburg to care for the wounded.
Right. So the shrine has a large church, a basilica, of course, and they also have where St. Elizabeth Ann Seton is buried, and they have a little museum that interprets her life.
Which was really nice. And a video.
A little video.
That included Kate Mulgrew playing of Captain Janeway of Star Trek Voyager as Elizabeth Ann Seton, apparently.
Right. So, if you don't know her, Elizabeth Ann Seton was born in New York in 1774, 2 years before the Revolution.
As an Episcopalian.
And she was an Episcopalian. Her dad was a doctor, and she married young. I think she was, 18?
19.
19. He was young. She married William Seton, who was a merchant. And his family was pretty well off, and they lived a very social life. She loved dancing and going to the theater and concerts. In fact, she kept a pair of her dancing slippers her entire life, and they were there in the museum.
And in fairly rapid succession, they had 5 kids.
Right. Her mother had died when she was very young. And so she'd always had this sense of her mother in heaven. And that had led to a very early awareness of heaven, of God. She was very devout, even as a young child. And then when her husband developed tuberculosis, I guess he'd had it for a long time, but then at some point, his doctors suggested that they go abroad to Italy, where the climate would be better. People often at that time traveled who had tuberculosis to better climates where it was warmer and would be better on their lungs. But when they arrived in Italy, the Italian authorities were afraid that they had yellow fever.
The yellow fever epidemic had broken out in New York just before they left.
Right. And so they were put into quarantine. And while they were still in quarantine...
Which is not being put up at the Best Western.
It was a dank...
It was a dungeon.
Cell, like a prison cell.
A lazarette, they called it.
And so while they were there, Elizabeth nursed her husband, who was sick of tuberculosis, and she nursed a bunch of the other people who were sick in the quarantine. And while they were there, her husband died. So he never even got to really see Italy. He just got a prison cell.
And they were going to visit the business acquaintances, friends of theirs who were Italian.
Right. So they had known through his company, they had known these Italian brothers, the Felicis, and one of them had married a woman from Boston. And so then after her husband died, Elizabeth and her daughter went and stayed with this family for quite a while. And it was at that time that she really began to know something about the Roman Catholic faith, because they were all Catholic. And she was very moved by what she saw there and very homesick.
Long story short,
she eventually converted and became Catholic. And then she came home to the United States. She was shunned by her friends and family for becoming Catholic, because at that time there was only one Catholic church in New York, and it was St. Patrick's, and it was for the poor Irish. And it was not for middle-class Episcopalian ladies.
Right, or former Episcopalian.
But she did convert, and she lost a lot of her friends and acquaintances, and she lost her means of livelihood because her husband's company had gone bankrupt, and she tried to support herself by running a school, and then all the Protestant ladies pulled their kids out of her school because they didn't want.
So the Bishop of Baltimore, John Carroll, invited her to move down there to start a school. Baltimore, Maryland, being a Catholic colony or state at the time, and so and then a seminarian who was of some means, wanting to divest himself of his wealth before becoming a priest, bought land in Emmitsburg for Elizabeth and to start a school, a boarding school that all these kids were sent to, and including her 5 kids and her husband's younger siblings, that she had taken on as a sort of foster mother because their mother and father had already died. And so she was caring for her own kids, her brothers and sisters-in-law who saw her as a mother figure, and then all these other kids, and then had started this religious community. Several of her own children died of tuberculosis as well. I mean, she suffered a lot.
Right.
But eventually, the order of the Daughters of Charity, Sisters of Charity, I forget exactly what.
Well, she started the Sisters of Charity, and she always intended to unite them with the Daughters of Charity, which St. Vincent de Paul had started in France. At the time she started them, there was a problem where there was a blockade and she couldn't actually communicate with France. But eventually the sisters did, after her death, reconnect with the sort of the
Vincentians,
right? And they became officially connected in some respect.
They're part of a federation of the Daughters of Charity throughout the United States. And so there's a beautiful shrine there. There's this beautiful basilica where she's buried. This really nice story of her life. There's also they had a really good exhibit on Civil War sisters. Like I was just talking about how the sisters went out all around the South to care for soldiers and were noted for being the ones who, A, knew what they were doing in caring for the sick, and B, were willing to go wherever they needed to.
The sisters were really impressive. This exhibit was really great. It had the Civil War artifacts. It had some life-size dioramas of sisters nursing both Union and Confederate soldiers, and a lot of really good stories about the sisters.
The best story was about how there was this one soldier who was being treated by his sister, and of course the soldiers didn't have dog tags, so they were assigned numbers, and this one soldier, when he regained consciousness, told the sister who he was. He was Elizabeth Ann Seton's grandson, and that this daughter of Elizabeth Ann Seton was treating, and you can imagine how she reacted that she had the foundress's grandson in her hospital bed.
My other favorite story from this little exhibit was one actually about the battle at Gettysburg, and it said that the sisters were treating soldiers at St. Francis Xavier Parish in Gettysburg, and one of the soldiers asked the sister, she
saw her give something to one of the other patients.
Right. And this other patient who had been groaning and moaning and in serious pain, once the sister gave him this thing, stopped moaning and was at peace. And so this one soldier says, I want whatever you gave him, sister, because he's been at peace ever since you gave it to him, and I want that. And so the sister explained that it was a miraculous medal. And the soldier she asked if he'd been baptized, and he said no. And the soldier needed an amputation to save his life, but he was scared to. And the sister talked to the doctor. The doctor said he will absolutely die if he doesn't have this limb amputated. And so the sister gave him the miraculous medal and baptized him on the condition that he would accept amputation.
I think it's still a valid baptism.
But he did. He had his leg amputated, and then the sister found a Catholic to give him instruction in the faith, and he went on to be a faithful Catholic.
Right.
And that story was moving, but it also clued us in to the fact that St. Francis Xavier Parish in Gettysburg
still exists,
which is still the parish church there. We had not realized that it was a Civil War era church and that had been used as a field hospital. So, of course, after we left the shrine, we had to go visit that parish.
Which it's still the original structure, but it was renovated in the 1920s. And it was really updated. It looks very, what is it, Italianate? It's stone, these big columns. It looks very 1920s Art Deco-ish.
And then in the 1950s, beautiful stained glass windows were installed, which include a stained glass window with Elizabeth Ann Seton and St. Vincent de Paul.
Yep. And then there's another one of St. Francis Xavier. And you found out that it was named St. Francis Xavier because it was Jesuits who founded it.
Right. Originally, before they even had a church, there were Jesuit priests who would go ride the circuit and have masses in people's homes. And then they built a St. Francis Xavier church. Interestingly enough, we found a plaque in the entrance of the church that we almost overlooked. But the church was actually dedicated and consecrated by another American saint, St. John Neumann,
who was Bishop of Philadelphia at the time, and that at the time Gettysburg was part of the Diocese of Philadelphia.
So John Neumann, as the bishop, came when they were ready to. He came for the laying of the cornerstone, and then when they were ready to dedicate the church, he came and he was the one who consecrated the church, which I thought was really, really cool.
I'm going to guess that some or all of this is going to be a part of American Catholic History podcast by Tom and Noel Grow, which is another podcast on the StarQuest network that you can find. It's sqpn.com/history. But this is the sort of stuff that is like right up their alley, this Catholic history stuff.
And I love it because growing up, even though I went to Catholic school, I have to say we didn't do a lot about the American Catholic history. Our history textbooks were just the standard textbooks that the public schools use.
Right.
And we didn't really learn very much about
Catholic history.
Right. And so now as an adult, I'm learning about this and I'm fascinated by it. It's really cool.
It is really neat. And it was that, and I was really happy that we knew that the shrine was down the street, and that was a key part of why we wanted to go to Gettysburg, was because we could also go to the shrine at the same time. And that was really nice to be able to do that, to incorporate our love for history in our country and our faith, and bring those together in that aspect.
Yeah, I read the kids a book about St. Elizabeth Ann Seton a couple years ago, and I really fell in love with her. Like she was a vague character to me before that. And then I found a book for myself called, it was something about the spiritual life of St. Elizabeth Ann Seton. It was very much more about her spirituality. And she was really an amazing woman.
Yes. Well, just based on what I saw in the exhibits. Yeah, pretty amazing. And then one of the interesting things is that one of the founders of one of the Daughters of Charity communities in the United States, in Kentucky, may have been an ancestor of yours?
A relative, right. Because my great-grandmother, actually going back to our family reunion in Kentucky and bringing it full circle, my great-grandmother was Leonora Spalding, and they were Catholics. One of her sisters was a nun, in fact. And there was a Mother Catherine Spalding, who founded the first group of Daughters of Charity in Kentucky. And she's evidently pretty famous in the Louisville area for having started schools and other things in Kentucky. And now I'm curious as to whether or not she's a relative.
Yeah, how many Catholic Spaldings from Kentucky from that era could there be who aren't all related?
And my uncle, who's the family historian, had already discovered that we are distantly related to, in fact, an Archbishop of Baltimore, Cardinal Spalding.
Yep.
Of Baltimore. And so it's possible that we're also related to this really cool Daughter of Charity who founded a community in Kentucky. I don't know. I'm really wanting to dig into this a little bit more with my uncle, who's the family historian.
Yeah. So pretty awesome all around. And so, I mean, is there anything else we want to talk?
I did want to mention that on our last day there, we also went to the cemetery where Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address. I really wanted to go to the spot.
Gettysburg National Cemetery, which is a soldier cemetery.
Yeah. And there's a monument there right where Lincoln stood and gave the address. And I stood under a tree nearby while we had another freak rainstorm and read the address to the kids. And then we walked around and we looked at the tombs of the soldiers who had died at Gettysburg. There were hundreds of unknown soldiers, which was really moving to me.
Yes, that is moving. It's a really nicely done, respectful cemetery, on a much smaller scale than like Arlington, but in the same vein. It's a cemetery for the fallen, and it's overlooks the battlefield. And so you can imagine Lincoln standing in this location, looking out over the field where Pickett's charge had just taken place a few months earlier, and the human cost and his humility and in saying that the something that turned out not to be true at all, which was that we would not long remember the words that he said. We'd still remember them and recite them from memory even, but that what he was right about was how the ground was hallowed by those who had given everything and sacrificed all, and so very moving to be there. Very, very amazing. I didn't get a chance. Speaking of the rain, we'll wrap it up really quickly. But one of the things we had pledged to do this time was when we'd gone to camping in Maine, we had fallen into this habit of, because our campground in Maine was far away from the places we were visiting, we wouldn't get back in time in order to make dinner. So we didn't like, let's just go out for dinner. And so we were going to make dinner at the campsite every night. We were going to stop at the market, pick up food because we only had a cooler. We couldn't keep it for too long, and bring it back to the site and cook it. And every night, something happened, usually rain of some sort or the threat of rain. Like Monday night, we ate out because we got there late. But Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday nights were all just rain, like the rain or threat of rain.
Tuesday and Wednesday nights were rain. Thursday night, it was just too hot to even think about a fire.
That's true. I think, yeah, Thursday night, we just given up by that point. But yeah, Wednesday night was when we went to the Mexican restaurant.
And then we had planned to actually come home on Saturday.
That's right. I didn't mention that.
But we looked at the forecast for Friday.
Friday night.
When Friday, it was supposed to be up in the 90s. And then Friday night, the overnight low was like 83.
Right. It wasn't going to, like, it was just going to be impossible to sleep.
And the kids had already been having a hard time sleeping and cranky and pushing at each other and kicking at each other because they were overheated. And they'd all brought like these big fleece blankets because they're used to camping in Maine. None of them had brought anything cool to sleep in. Anthony even had fleece pajama pants.
Yeah, his fleece pajama pants that he wears year round.
Yeah, which is fine in our air-conditioned house, but he was not happy, and I finally told him to just wear his regular shorts to bed, yeah. Which he did not like, but he did, reluctantly. So we just decided that discretion is the better part of valor, and we packed up and left on Friday.
We felt like we weren't going to miss, like we only missed one thing that we wanted to do, which was to visit the Dwight Eisenhower farm. So President Eisenhower, when he retired, bought a farm in Gettysburg that was, well, actually before he retired, it was the summer White House. It was like they went there for vacations,
right? Like
Camp David and that sort of thing. But they went there, and then upon the death of Mamie Eisenhower, they had willed it to the National Park Service. And so you can go there. You have to take a bus. Like they have a shuttle bus that drives out there. In fact, it was really around the corner from our campground. It was actually very close. And but we didn't get a chance. And so we want to go back. We'll definitely go back to Gettysburg someday because it was pretty awesome. And there's so much more to see. We barely scratched the surface of even just telling you about it. So that's the only thing we really missed.
Yeah, Isabella really wanted to go see it. She really loves the presidents in American history.
Right. She's already visited at least 2 presidential homes, John Adams and Andrew Jackson.
John Adams and John Quincy Adams.
Well, right. So that's 3. Yeah. John Adams, John Quincy Adams, because dad and son. And then we saw Andrew Jackson's Hermitage when we went through Nashville last year.
Right.
So, and we'll go to Mount Vernon sometime. I definitely want to do that.
And Monticello.
So the only other thing I wanted to mention was the cost of the park itself, of the things at the park.
Oh boy, that was a sticker shock when we got there. So
when you get to the visitor center, they have a movie, they have a museum exhibit, a cyclorama, which is a 360-degree painting that has a narrative that unfolds, and they shine lights on the different parts of the painting that tell the story, all this sort of stuff. Nothing was included. Nothing was free. It was all like they had some exhibits out that you could just wander past and take a look at, like of various weapons and that.
Actually, the exhibits that were free were kind of cool. There was a video about how to fire a cannon, and there was a video about how to load a musket, and there were Confederate and Union uniforms, and there was like a hands-on exhibit for the kids where you could go through the haversack of a soldier and see what the soldiers would have carried on them.
Right.
Prayer book and matches and shaving mirror and toothbrush and harmonica and playing cards and stuff.
Right. So they did have that, and you could see all the different types of weapons that they would have, all the different rifles, all the different pistols and all that sort of stuff, even the instruments, musical instruments of the band, the military band.
But there was a whole museum that we did not go to.
Right. Because, yeah, like I said, it was all extra, all an additional cost, and it wasn't cheap. I mean, again, this is a thing we're often talking about. As a family of 7, everything, those sorts of things are very expensive, and there are no family rates. Everything, like even just for us to go to the Eisenhower farm would be $9 per adult and $5 per child, was it?
Right. Which, when you've only got 1 or 2 kids, that's $5-10. That's not a big deal. But when you've got 5 kids, that's $25
on top of the nearly $40 for us, and that's $65 to go out to this farm for an hour and a half. And it's just, I mean, we would have done that. That one we would have done. But then, watch a video, that would have been another $75 to watch the film, just to watch a film.
Right. And then another similar amount to see the museum, and another similar amount to see the cyclorama.
And then the David Willis House, which is in the middle of Gettysburg, is literally in the center of Gettysburg, where Lincoln wrote the Gettysburg Address. That was an extra cost. So all these things added up. And the Park Service has this 4th graders get into parks for free with their family deal that they do every summer. And Ben's technically, as a homeschooler, sure, he's a 4th grader. And so, but that was not any use there at all. They didn't take it for anything. And so I was a little disappointed in that there was, everything was extra. Everything, it was cost upon cost upon cost.
We didn't realize that it cost extra before we got there. And so we had told the kids, watch the movie and we'll go to the museum. And we ended up saying, yeah, maybe not.
Right. One other thing that you can do if you want to do it is you can hire a guide. So we had the auto tour with the CD. You can actually hire a licensed guide who will drive you around in your car to the spots and get in and tell you face to face, which can be a more hands-on sort of experience. And he tailors it for you, and your level of knowledge.
Yeah, and as we drove around the park, we saw quite a few people with guides.
Right. And there were bus tours that do the things too. And there were a lot of scout troops, like we mentioned. There were several scout troops we saw visiting the battlefield. So there's a lot of different ways to experience it. And we're looking forward to going back. We have a friend who has been many times, who had suggested various things to us. And he and his family have been many times. And so we'll probably go back again at least another time. But in spring or fall, not in the middle of summer.
Late September?
Maybe late September. So, all right, let's wrap it up there. That's enough for now. So let us know what you think of our discussion and any of the stuff we brought up, and if you've had any experiences, if you've been to Gettysburg or any other Civil War battlefield, or just your reflections on it. We'd love to hear from you. And
any recommendations for things that our family might choose to do in the future. Yeah. We are always looking for fun experiences to take the kids to,
especially if it's within a day's drive, say 10 or 12-hour drive of Boston.
And if there's an educational twist, we really like that. Since we're homeschoolers, we count this as the kids didn't do any math, they didn't read any books.
Oh, this was history.
But this was definitely intensive history.
Yeah.
Hands-on, like you can't get in school.
So you can let us know all this you can go to sqpn.com/bets or the SQPN Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. You can leave feedback there on the show post there, or you can send us an email to bets, that's BETTS, at sqpn.com. And you can find we'll have some relevant links to various things, including the apps that I talked about, maybe the tent, if you're interested in getting a new tent. We'll put links for those on our show notes on sqpn.com. If you could do us a favor, if you're listening to the show and you're enjoying it, could you go to Apple Podcasts, the app, or to whatever directory you get your podcast from, and write a review for us? We really do appreciate that. It's not just we need to stroke our ego. Reviews help the algorithms to know that they should show that people are enjoying this, and that they should show it to other people who might like it, people who like the same things as you, for example. So please write a review and share the podcast with your friends. Help us grow our community of listeners. We love to connect with you. That's why we're doing it. So we really do appreciate that. Until next time, I'm Dom Bettinelli.
And I'm Melanie Bettinelli.
Thank you for listening to Raising the Bets on StarQuest.